good to be with you in Steve's continued absence. I'm going to start, where are we at? Wait, somebody's going to have to tell me because I haven't been here the last two classes. No, but for real, I am going to do a quick review and get us caught up to where we are. If we'll go back, Sunday was kind of the preparation for the battle. There was a lot going on getting ready for the battle that we talked about Wednesday. Then Wednesday, we're looking at two different fronts because David is in one spot and Saul is in another. This time, however, Saul's not going after David. David was about to meet Saul in battle because David was on the backside of the Philistines. How did he get there? Well, he went to Achish and told him that he had been raiding in the cities in the area. He said that he was attacking and raiding Judean cities, when in reality he was attacking Amalekites and other foreigners in that area. But he's reporting to Achish all these victories against these cities. Achish says, yes, he's one of us. He's with the Philistines. So Achish takes David. He takes him to the rest of the Philistines, ready to go fight these Israelites. The rest of the Philistines see David and say, hey, we know this guy. We know this guy. He's slain his 10,000s. So David is kept from going with the Philistines into battle against the Israelites. Now, as was pointed out before, I'm sure David would have been on the backside of the Philistines, fighting them from the rear somehow. But he instead is sent back to Ziklag. He goes to Ziklag, and what does he find? It's burned. He finds the city in ruins and the people gone, including his two wives. And so they're crushed. They are in tears. They're in this great mourning. But then David goes to God. He goes to God, and then he rallies his men, and they go and defeat these Amalekites. They defeat them, utterly destroy them. Now these Amalekites, they've been doing a lot of raiding. Why have they been doing this raiding? They've been raiding Philistines. They've been raiding the Israelites, these different areas. How are they doing this? Because all the Philistines and everybody has gone to war. They're all on these battlefronts against each other, so the Amalekites are saying, hey, empty cities, lots of spoils, we're going to go in and take it. So they've been doing this, and now David, having returned, instead of battling the Philistines, he goes and defeats the Amalekites, gets the people back and takes great amounts of spoil. He brings it back, divides it among the men. And that's where we leave David for the moment. But at the same time, while David's doing this, over on the battlefront, Saul is fighting the Philistines. And that battle doesn't go well. The Israelites are soundly defeated, and Saul is mortally wounded in the battle, and his sons are killed. Well, Saul turned to his armor bearer and said, kill me now so that they won't torture me. But his armor bearer refuses, and so Saul falls on his own sword, and then the armor bearer does the same. This is where we pick up this morning. You know, I used to love any kind of battle in the Bible as a kid. Just any story, any encounter that involved a big battle was one of my favorites. This was one of my favorite stories as a kid. And really, I thought that this was a joyous, momentous time for David. Is that what we see, though, as we open up 2 Samuel 1? No. As a kid, I thought David, the good guy, has been on the run from Saul, the bad guy. Is that what we really see here? No. We see these battles. These battles are God's judgment on one people or another. In this case, today, the judgment is on Saul and on his house. Saul has been defeated. He has been killed. So a young man, we find out to be an Amalekite, with torn clothes and dust covering him, comes to David at Ziklag. As we get into 2 Samuel 1 in the first couple of verses there. This young man comes to David and he reports on the battle. He says in verse 3, David says, "Where have you come from?" He said to him, "I have escaped from the camp of Israel." Verse 4, David said to him, "How did the matter go? Please tell me." And he answered, "The people have fled from the battle. Many of the people are fallen and dead. Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead also." So David said to the young man who told him, "How do you know this, that Saul and Jonathan, his son, are dead?" The young man goes on to say, "I was going along and I saw Saul leaning on his spear. And he said to me, 'Kill me yourself,' after asking who he was, that he was an Amalekite. He said, 'Kill me yourself.'" And in verse 10, "So I stood over him and killed him because I was sure that he would not live after he had fallen." Hang on. This is different from what we just said happened at the end of 1 Samuel, isn't it? This young man is talking to David, the one who is about to become king, the one whom everyone knows is about to be king of Israel. This young man told a story here. He took the crown and the bracelet from Saul's body, but he wasn't the one that killed Saul, right? He told this story thinking that he would gain favor in David's sight. He was the one that killed David's adversary to the throne. Again, that would prop up the idea that this was a momentous day, that this was a happy day for David, that his enemy was defeated, that he was going to be king. That's not David's reaction. Starting in verse 11, "Therefore David took hold of his own clothes and tore them, and so did all the men who were with him. They mourned and wept and fasted until evening for Saul and for Jonathan his son, for the people of the Lord and for all the house of Israel, because they had fallen by the sword." This was a sad day, not just for Saul's house, but for all of Israel. Many Israelites had died in this battle. Verse 13, "Then David said to the young man who told him, 'Where are you from?' And he answered, 'I am the son of an alien, an Amalekite.' So David said to him, 'How was it that you were not afraid to put forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?'" If I was that young man right now, I'd be thinking, uh-oh, what's about to happen, right? Then David called one of the young men and said, "Go near and execute him." And he struck him so that he died. So David said to him, "Your blood is on your own head, for your own mouth has testified against you, saying, 'I have killed the Lord's anointed.'" Whether he did it or not is besides the point. He said that he had done it, and to David, that was the same as doing it. David loved Saul. He never wanted ill for Saul. Not just because he was the Lord's anointed, though. Think back to early in Saul's reign, or during the middle of it maybe. At one point, David was like a son to Saul. How did David and Jonathan get so close? They were in the same place often. They were constantly around each other. David was close to Saul too. All the time on the run. David said, "I can't stretch out my hand against the Lord's anointed." But maybe there was more to it than that, because he was also, at one point, like a father to him. David had more than just an obligation to Saul. And we really see that here in his reaction to his death. Because then he doesn't stop here. He goes on in the next few verses. He writes a song for Saul and for Jonathan. And it's not focused on Jonathan. You know, we focus on the relationship between David and Jonathan because that was the one that stayed strong and true and good through all of it. But he lifted up Saul in this song as well. He says, "The beauty of Israel is slain on your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Tell it not in Gath, proclaim it not in the streets of Ashkelon, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice." Don't talk about this. Don't talk about the death of Saul and of Jonathan, because it'll make the Philistines happy. Lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. O mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew nor rain upon you, nor fields or offerings, for the shield of the mighty is cast away there, the shield of Saul not anointed with oil. You know, after a battle, they would clean their weapons and they would anoint their swords and their shields with oil to cleanse them, to repair them, and to get them ready, shiny and new for the next battle. Here at the end of this battle, Saul's shield wasn't cared for. It wasn't taken care of after this battle. Instead, it's laying in the mud on the field. It's laying in the mud drenched with his blood, instead of shiny and new and ready for the next battle. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan did not turn back, and the sword of Saul did not return empty. David said they went down fighting. They fought the enemies of the Lord. They fought the Philistines. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives. Wow. What a statement for David to make of Saul. They were pleasant in their lives. Over the last few years, has Saul been pleasant at all? Especially towards David. Where did that pleasantness go? Saul became fearful. He became paranoid. He wasn't pleasant to David. And from the reactions of those around him, he wasn't pleasant to his men either. Because we saw in the last class that men were leaving Saul and going to David. Before the Battle of Ziklag, more men joined him. The focus is on those 600 because they were directly impacted by, the burning of Ziklag. But there were more men now with David. Saul wasn't pleasant by this point. But yet, David can still say that he was pleasant. They were beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, they were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. He's saying that Saul built up the nation and gave everyone a bit more prosperity, right? That he did good for the people. This isn't what you expect a successor to be saying. I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. You have been very pleasant to me. Your love to me was wonderful, surpassing the love of women. A lot of people try to turn this into a homosexual relationship between David and Jonathan. But we know from our own lives that there are people who we love as much as or more than spouses. There are these people that are so close to us that we share so much with that they are that close with us. This is how David felt about Jonathan. How the mighty have fallen and the weapons of war perished. This isn't an exciting time. Sure, there's about to be a new king. There's about to be a more righteous king over Israel. But to the people and to David and to his men right now, there is no joy in Israel. Because back at the beginning of the psalm, or just before, he says, David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son, and he told them to teach the children of Judah the song of the bow. David wanted this to be shared, to be used to honor Saul and Jonathan. So now David returns. Before he does, he inquires of the Lord, like we often see him do. He says, shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? In chapter 2, verse 1. And the Lord said to him, go up. And David said, where shall I go up? And he said, to Hebron. So David goes up to Hebron. He takes all his men with him and their families. It specifically says here that David went up from there and his two wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. So David brought up the men who were with him, every man with his household, and they dwelt in Hebron. But then the men of Judah come to David, and they tell him that it was the men of Jabesh Gilead who buried Saul. So then David brings the men of Jabesh Gilead to him and says, you are blessed of the Lord, for you have shown this kindness to your Lord, to Saul, and have buried him. Why do you think Jabesh Gilead might have been felt particularly indebted to Saul? That's right. One of the first things he did was rescue Jabesh Gilead from these men who wanted to pluck out their eyes, right? So then they turn and repay Saul this kindness. And that's not the end of this either. We'll see more about this later in David's reign. But David blesses him and says, now may the Lord show kindness and truth to you. I also will repay you this kindness because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strengthened and be valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them. So he says, let you be strengthened in your time of loss here. Not everyone's on board with David's reign, though. We have Abner. Abner was the commander of Saul's army. He was also Saul's cousin. So, cousin of the king who has just died goes and makes his son king instead. Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead, over the Asherites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel, and he reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. And we see that David was a king in Hebron up to this point for about 7.5 years. Well, we have 2 kings over 1 nation. So what's about to happen? They're about to go to war, right? There's about to be civil war among the people, among the nation of Israel. So Abner, the son of Ner, the servant of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon. And Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and the servants of David went out to meet them by the pool of Gibeon. And it's interesting what happens next. They sit down on opposite sides of this pool. And they try to work out peace so that they're not going to war against their brethren. Because this has already happened a couple of times over for the nation of Israel. Where one tribe went to war against another. One example is when, in the book of Judges, when the Levite and his concubine, everything that happens there, Benjamin protects the people of the city there. And so Israel went to war against Benjamin. When they did that, Benjamin was almost completely destroyed. They were down to just a few hundred men. And so they had to scrounge up women for those men to marry in order to save the entire tribe of Benjamin. It's not pretty when a country goes to war against itself. I mean, it's happened in our nation. It's happened in other nations. And it's always a sad time. So they sit down and they say, how can we avoid going to battle here? And they end up offering a contest of champions, so to speak. They put 12 men from each army against each other. And these 24 men are supposed to decide who wins the battle so that they won't go to war and they can know who will be king. Well, that's not how it goes. So they arose and went out by number, 12 from Benjamin, followers of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and 12 from the servants of David. Each one grasped his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in his opponent's side, and they fell down together. Therefore that place was called the Field of Sharp Swords, which is in Gibeon. So there was a very fierce battle that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. So once those men killed each other, it turned into a battle anyway. Tempers got hot and they started fighting, and it turned into a great battle. And in this battle, friends kill friends, just like in any battle among brethren. So the sons of Zeruiah there were three sons of Zeruiah: Joab and Abishai and Asahel. Asahel was very fast of foot. He was very agile, and he takes off after Abner, and he chases him down. He catches up to him. And Abner's running, he's looking over his shoulder, and he says, "Turn away, Asahel, turn away." Asahel keeps coming. Abner says again, turn away. I don't want to have to kill you." And he says it a third time, "Turn away." Asahel refuses. So Abner throws a spear point into the ground. Asahel runs onto the butt of the spear and impales himself. Asahel, being one of these three brothers are the nephews of David. So you have the cousin of Saul killing the nephew of David. These aren't enemies. These aren't strangers. These are all brethren. They know each other. Abner didn't want to kill Asahel. Verse 24. Joab and Abishai also pursued Abner. So once Asahel has died, then the brothers come after Abner. And the sun was going down when they came to the hill of Ammah, which is before Giah, by the road to the wilderness of Gibeon. Now the children of Benjamin gathered together behind Abner and became a unit. They took their stand on top of the hill. Abner called to Joab and said, "Shall the sword devour forever? Do you not know that it will be bitter in the latter end? How long will it be then until you tell the people to return from pursuing their brethren?" So here Abner essentially offers a surrender. He says, if we don't turn back now, it's going to be even worse, and everyone's going to be dead. And Joab said, as God lives, unless you had spoken, surely then by morning all the people would have given up pursuing their brethren. So Joab said, if you hadn't said it, then at some point the people would have just fallen apart and stopped doing it anyway. Joab accepts the surrender. Joab blew a trumpet, and all the people stood still and did not pursue Israel anymore, nor did they fight anymore. Abner and his men went on all that night through the plain. So Abner and his men returned home, and they spend all night marching home. So Joab returned from pursuing Abner, and when they had gathered all the people together, there were missing of David's servants 19 men in Asahel. 20 together. 20 men of David were slain that day. Verses. Among the men of Benjamin and Abner's men, 360 men died. Who was God with in this battle, right? I'm sure he wasn't pleased that Israelites were fighting Israelites. But he was with David and his men. They took up Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb, which was in Bethlehem. Joab and his men went all night. They came to Hebron at daybreak. So here we are, opening 2 Samuel. David is king, and he's already fighting for the kingdom. Now, this isn't the end of the skirmishes between David and Ishbosheth. They'll continue for a bit longer. And every time they fight, it's like this. It's brethren fighting against brethren. This is still a very sad time for Israel. Did Abner know that David was to be king? It seemed like it was pretty well known that David was going to be the next king. After all, the Amalekite came to David and said, hey, I've done this thing, thinking that it would be good for him. Which brings us to our first lesson for the day of not saying what we think people want to hear. Oftentimes, it's the wrong thing. And oftentimes, it's sin in itself. I mean, this man lied to David, and he got the punishment for his lie. But I want to open it up now to questions, comments. We see again here that David would not touch the Lord's anointed. But beyond that, he wanted what was best for Saul. He didn't find any pleasure in Saul's end. It was more than, he had an attitude of protecting and standing beside Saul. He was not going to touch him because God had anointed him. In the same way, we're coming up on an election cycle, right? And we are going to have a new president before too long. And whoever it is whether we like it or not, what's our obligation here? It's the same. Can we show the same heart that David did in protecting and building up and standing beside the Lord's anointed through everything? Are we going to rejoice when this president leaves office? Are we going to spend our time talking badly about the one who sits in the Oval Office, or the cabinet and everyone who is supporting him making decisions? Is that the attitude that we should have? It's definitely not the attitude that David had. And who was David? A man after God's own heart. He, more than anyone, should have had the right, the ability, and every excuse possible to lift his hand against Saul. Every time he was in a cave, every time he had an opportunity to kill Saul, maybe the thought went through his head, is this God's way of exalting me? That's not how David looked at it. He waited for God to exalt him, to build him up. And in God's time, he did. Yeah.
We can really look to David as a way of loving our enemies. And it is obvious, like you were saying, he loved Saul, but that love for Saul wasn't based on Saul's merits. It was based
Sure.
on God's care for Saul and what God had appointed him. When we're looking at our enemies, we don't have to look at their merits or what they did to us. We just look at, this is a child of God, and what does God want me to do towards them?
Absolutely. Tanya was saying that this is a way that we can look to this as an example of loving our enemies. That when we have people that we disagree with or who even mean us harm, it's not our place to turn that on them, but instead to look at them as either God's children or people who God wants to be his children. And in time, God will do what he wishes in that instance. So. Mm-hmm.
There are a couple other reasons. God had already pronounced judgment on the Amalekites. Saul failed to fulfill. Plus, the Amalekites had just taken his wives and all his men's families and belongings. Some of them had escaped. So he was doing what God had pronounced on the Amalekites anyway. Plus, finishing up some previous work he was doing.
Right. Mr. Mike here is saying that there were a lot of reasons for David to kill that Amalekite, right? Because, first of all, they had already been set for destruction by God back in 1 Samuel chapter 15, when Saul was supposed to utterly destroy the Amalekites. When he did not complete that, apparently some band of Amalekites, a wilderness tribe, grew, and so David was taking care of another enemy of God. And also, there's a little bit of revenge there because he had just, the Amalekites had just burned Ziklag and taken all of their families captive. So David had a lot of reasons for and justification in killing that Amalekite.
I still think we need to be careful because I think David recognized Saul as the anointed of God. And even before he kills him, he says, you killed the anointed, you felt like you killed him. So I think the
for sure. Mr. Gary was just saying that above any other reasons, whether they existed or not, David's devotion to Saul was because he was the Lord's anointed. That was his focus and is his reasoning every time that he was put in a situation where that could be compromised.
I think these things are coming out, and also providence of David not being there in the battle with Saul coming handy when David was trying to really unite the kingdom under him, so that he did not harm Saul at all, and that he was nowhere near the battle where Saul, Jonathan died. They were north and he went south because of the projection from the other Philistines, kind of put him far away from that battle at all. So you see some of God's providence there and keeping David pure in that sense, maybe not completely.
Sure, beyond not being able to, being put in a position where he would want to do harm himself, also being away from that battle, he's not even in a position where someone could say that he was at all involved in it. Great point, Eric. Thank you for your attention and participation this morning. It's been good to be with you.